mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about Season 1, Episode 7 of HBO's House of the Dragon, entitled Driftmark. This episode is called Driftmark because everything that's of any sort of importance takes place on Driftmark in this episode. I mean, I don't know, while I'm going through kind of like my recap, I might come across some things that didn't happen on Driftmark, but I'm pretty sure everything in this episode that's important happens on Driftmark. So that's the reason for the name of the episode. There's also some things that I kind of want to address regarding some of the criticisms of the show and some of the comparisons that happen between this and Game of Thrones, but I'm going to save that for the end of the video because there's so much great stuff to discuss from this awesome episode that I don't want to eat up any of that time talking about like shit that doesn't have anything to do with the episode itself. So I thought this episode was great because I think it did a number of things. Like, one, it gave us a shit ton of information at the beginning, important things that I'm going to go over. Lots of stuff we learned at Laena's funeral at the beginning. And then I loved how the events of the end of the episode, the situation with the families at the end that revolved around Aemond, and then the situation with Laenor, all of that shit they set up really well. And I think that helped those things pay off. So, really strong episode. I really liked everything that they did here. And I think right now it's just good. It's a good time to start getting into the details here. So, we start off at Laena's funeral on Driftmark. And first, I thought it was cool to see a funeral at high tide on Driftmark, a completely different style of funeral. No, we've seen men burned on funeral pyres, just like if you think, outside the wall when people died in those battles at the end of Game of Thrones, them just being put on the pyre and set to fire. We see the same thing with Khal Drogo in Season 1. And then you also have the dragon version of that as well, where dragons just kill people and not even just send them to ash, essentially. And we've even seen other funerals that involve water. If you think Hoster Tully on Game of Thrones, if you remember the whole situation with Catelyn's brother, his name escapes me at the moment. I don't know, his name escapes me, but you remember he's trying to hit that flaming arrow on the boat while the body's in there and he kept missing. And then the Blackfish came over and did it on the first try, and like Steph Curry walked away before the arrow even landed. But like, we've seen all these different types of funerals, so it was cool seeing a different custom and a different tradition over on Driftmark. So I thought that was pretty cool. But a lot of things of note happen at this funeral. So the first thing, Otto returns wearing the Hand of the Kingpin, which is right at the beginning of the episode. So they wasted no time in shitting all over my Damon's going to be Hand of the King theory. But it's good that Otto is back because that works out well for Alicent. And I think that balances the scales that exist now, I think, more prominently by the end of the episode. We know more dickish behavior from Aegon. He looks bored and uninterested at the funeral. Damon laughs at one point. So there's no shortage of disrespect that happens at Laena's funeral. So I think that's of note. Not surprising with Damon. Well, no, I'm sorry. Not surprising with Aegon because he's kind of a dick. But I felt that Damon really had real feelings for Laena. And I do to a degree still think that he did. But I was surprised by Damon's behavior because I felt like he would be more respectful of her in that moment, or respectful of her body anyway in that moment. But that's what happens. There's an interesting moment where Viserys talks to Rhaenyra about how he would rather be mourning Harwin and Lionel, his true father and grandfather, than being at this funeral for Laena, which is simultaneously some insight into Viserys' mindset, but then also just kind of like, man, like Laena ain't even do nothing to you, bro. Like, you can still kind of want to be at this. Luke tells Corlys that he doesn't want to rule Driftmark. I think that's of note, especially given the conversation that happens between Corlys and Rhaenys later when they talk about the idea of having one of the daughters be, I think, Baela inherit Driftmark. When I say one of the daughters, I mean one of the daughters of Damon and Laena. So Damon has a conversation with Viserys in which he turns down an offer to return to King's Landing. And I think this is interesting because Damon seems very hurt in this scene, like he's trying to hold in some feelings of anger. And like, Damon hasn't done anything to be justified in holding a grudge toward Viserys. If anything, Viserys should be holding a grudge toward him. But I think that what's interesting about this scene is that Damon seems hurt. And I think that's because Viserys has never really taken his side. You know, when Otto comes and is like, yo, Damon was shitting on your dead son, the heir for a day thing. He instantly believes it. He confronts Damon about it. And then Damon, being Damon, doesn't deny it. And that originally came off to me as like, I'd rather fuck with my brother than tell the truth and say like, I didn't say that or whatever. He gains more from fucking with his brother. And then the same thing happens when he's accused of having sex with Rhaenyra, which we know didn't happen, but he doesn't deny it. And I said in the video for that episode that he's developed a history of not denying things that he didn't do and that he shouldn't deny, although I'm assuming he didn't say the thing about the heir for a day. I'm working under the assumption that he didn't say that just because it tracks with the rest of his behavior, but maybe he did. But he has this history, assuming that's true, of not denying things he didn't do in the interest of fucking with Viserys. But this scene kind of changes the way I look at Damon, because it feels like now it wasn't so much I'm not denying things to fuck with you. Now it feels like he's hurt by the fact that Viserys doesn't even think highly enough to question these accusations. And it's one of those things where it's like, well, if I'm going to be accused of this, I might as well do it. You know how people say that sort of thing? Like, if I'm going to be called a cheater, I might as well cheat, which is a ridiculous fucking way of thinking. But that's what I think Damon has kind of been operating under now, like based upon how he interacted with Viserys here. It makes me wonder if it's like, well, if my brother doesn't think so little of me that he thinks I would say and do these sorts of things, he's not doing it, but he's not denying it either. And I think he's hurt that Viserys just does not seem to take his side ever and is ready and willing to believe any amount of slander that's about Damon. So I could be wrong, and maybe there's something that's a much more direct explanation of Damon's behavior in this conversation. Feel free to put in the comments if you think so, but he could just be becoming more and more. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself here, but yeah, I think Damon is just kind of disillusioned with Viserys at this point, and kind of is disowned him to a degree. You know, like I'm not gonna come here and hang with you because you don't fuck with me like that. You're saying this right now, but the next time somebody comes to you with a rumor about me, you're gonna believe it and you're gonna shit on me and you're gonna kick me out of here and all this kind of stuff. So I think Damon is just truly just hurt by his brother never taking his side. And I think that's an interesting way to kind of like recontextualize Damon's behavior in the previous 6 episodes. So Viserys calls Alicent Emma by mistake at the funeral. And we saw him looking at Emma's ring last week. And it just makes me wonder if Viserys is becoming like, I don't want to say disinterested, but maybe like a little bit more prone to shunning Alicent, especially given the events of the end of the episode. If he's a little bit more willing to fall out of love with Alicent and focus a little bit more, can't say focus more because there's nothing you can do with Emma, but like, long for someone who he maybe loved and respected a little bit more than he does Alicent, given her actions at the end of the episode. So we saw the ring last week. We see the calling her Emma this week. So I'm wondering where they're going to take this whole thing with Viserys longing for his wife and almost seeing Alicent as her, what they're going to do with that. I don't really have a guess. My theories have not worked out well anyway, so why would I even put one out there in the universe? But I don't have anything for right now, but let me know in the comments what you think, how they might play this whole thing with Viserys longing after Emma. I haven't said I don't think on here before, but I've only read the books up until what we've seen. So what I've done is, after a new episode, I'll do like a little bit more of the book up until where I feel like, okay, this is where I should stop. so I don't get spoiled on the next episode. So I have an understanding of the history, but no knowledge of the future. So I don't know what's going to happen between Alicent and Viserys, but if you have theories, let me know. If you know what happened, shut the fuck up and don't tell me. So, moving on, Rhaenys blames Damon for Laena's death, which I think is fair, right? She wanted to leave. She was like, I want to go back to Driftmark. I want my kids born on Driftmark. I want my kids raised on Driftmark. I can't even say Damon told her no, because he just kisses her on the stomach and is like, yo, why the fuck you still in here? And she leaves. So, I think she's right, I think, in holding Damon accountable for this. But she also, and I think this was right as well, she put some blame on Corlys for being throne thirsty. And I think that's accurate. She makes a really good case as to why he's the one who's obsessed over having even just some affiliation with the throne, since he can't personally sit on it. But he does have an interesting reply where he says that history remembers names and not blood. So, I don't know. I don't know what his plan is, but it is interesting because when you think about motivations, his best case scenario is having like a kid or a relative that is on the throne or married to someone who's on it. Like it seems like he's putting himself through a lot to not personally be king or probably not even hand of the king or whatever. For him to not personally be able to gain any real power, he's putting a lot into who goes where and who does what as far as succession goes. So we also find out that Rhaenyra tried to have kids with Laenor, which I think is interesting, and that speaks to the nature of their relationship, because that's going to come into play later. Because if we look at it as they went so far as to actually try to have kids in order to fulfill their duty, I think it says a lot about the relationship that those two have. And it wasn't just we're going to do this for appearances. Like, hey, let's pretend to be married outwardly, and then we'll do our own thing secretly, and we don't really fuck with each other. Like, I feel like there's multiple indications throughout this episode, and this is the first one, where we see some evidence that maybe Rhaenyra and Laenor were not, in love or anything like that. But it was more than just like, we're totally separate and we're going to pretend like we're cool in front of people. Like, I think they really were cool, and they really did have a decent relationship. But she tells this to Damon, that she tried to have kids with Laenor, and Damon implies after that Alicent had the Strongs killed. He doesn't say it directly, but he implies it, and Rhaenyra rejects this at the moment. She probably won't, given the events of the end of the episode, but she rejects it at the time. Given what happens at the end of the episode, I wonder if we're going to revisit at some point Alicent's involvement in the deaths of Harwin and Lionel Strong. Now, here's what I think is important, and I feel like they haven't spent a lot of time on this, and admittedly, I missed it last week. It wasn't until it happened again this week, and I thought, let me dig in a little bit, that I think there's something interesting at play here. So they low-key slide in that Aegon is betrothed to his sister, Helena. We see this while Aegon and Aemond are watching her play with a spider. She's mumbling a bunch of jibber-jabber, and they kind of shit on her, but then they say that, that's his future wife, they're betrothed, and Aemond's like, I'd have done it, no problem. I don't know why you bitching. But the reason I want to talk about this is because I want to talk about what Helena is saying in this scene, and talk about what she was saying last week. So last week, she's playing with like this long centipede, this bug, that she says it has like 60 rings and 4 legs per ring or something like that. And she's like, oh, it's 240 legs. And then Aemond comes in. And this is after Aemond had the run-in with his brothers and Rhaenyra's kids with the pink dread thing and all that. So he comes in, and him and Alicent are having the conversation about the pig and all this kind of shit. And when I think it's before he comes in, after Helena makes the comment about this centipede being built out of 60 rings and each one having 4 legs, she says this last ring has no legs at all, which didn't stand as anything didn't stand out as anything important to me in that moment. But I'm going to come back to that. So after Aemond comes in, he starts, complaining about the whole dragon thing. And Alicent says, you will have a dragon one day. And then out of nowhere, Helena goes, he'll have to close an eye. And she doesn't look at him or anything. I think she's still looking at the book. But she says out loud, he'll have to close an eye. Given what happened in this episode, does that not suggest that Helena can see the future? Like, that she has the ability to do so? And then now we go back to that comment, the last ring has no legs at all. Is that like saying like the last ring in like the succession of kings has no legs at all, aka Bran Stark? Like, can she predict that far into the future? Like, and I don't know. I'm curious about. I think it's clear that she could see the future to some degree, but it's unclear if we can glean anything from what she says or if that's going to come into play later. So fast forward again, no, not fast forward, but return to this week's episode, last night's episode. And this time I wrote down what she said. So while Aegon and Aemond were watching her and while she was playing with the spider, she said, and she repeated this two times and started a third time. Hand turns loom, spool of green, spool of black. Dragon's flesh, weaving dragons of thread. Now, I don't know what dragon's flesh, weaving dragons of thread means. That I can't. I think if you look at the whole thing collectively, you can kind of piece something together. So, hand turns loom. A loom can be turned by hand, but I think what that means specifically in this case is that the hand turns the loom. So, and a loom is a device that you use for sewing, I believe. So hand turns loom, that reads to me as hand as in auto turns the loom. Let me see if I can do something real quick here. I want to just pull up, if I can, a definition of loom. An apparatus for making fabric by weaving yarn or thread. So yes, I'm right. So it's for weaving. So hand turns the loom. Hand turns loom, that's auto. So that to me means like he's plotting, right? And it says spool of green, spool of black. Obviously, that if you think of a spool of thread, right? And we know that the loom creates fabric by weaving spools of thread. So she's saying the hand is turning the loom. That's auto. He's making the machinations. He has a spool of green for Hightower, a spool of black for Targaryen, and then dragon's flesh, weaving dragons of thread. So sticking with the weaving concept here, weaving dragons of thread is interesting to me. Like, I can't quite make out what that's supposed to mean. If you look at dragons as being vicious, dangerous, important, what is he weaving that's like a dragon out of this thread of green and black? It could just mean like actually, I might be looking at it too deeply. He could just mean this motherfucker's causing trouble. Like, weaving a dragon of thread, and if the thread is made out of the green of Hightower and the black of Targaryen, it could just all be the metaphorical way of saying the hand is causing shit, making this dragon of thread that's made out of Hightower and Targaryen. So I think this could be a prediction that Otto is going to escalate things even further before the season ends. But I just wanted to put that out there that, like, now if we see Helena next week and she's muttering some jibber jabber, like I said at the beginning, pause it and write that shit down and see if we could use it to kind of like make some predictions on what's going to happen. Because I think it's very clear that Helena has the ability to, not the ability to see into the future, but her ramblings are indications of things that are going to happen in the future. So Rhaenyra and Damon eventually decide that they're going to go ahead and fuck, while both Laena and Harwin's bodies are literally, because they were both killed by fire, their bodies are both literally still warm, while their widow and widowers decide that they're going to fuck each other. But I want to talk about this scene because this is the one thing about this episode I didn't like. You know, this scene and the following scene with Aegon Aemond trying and successfully to mount Vhagar are incredibly poorly lit. And you have, this time, these scenes take place kind of like at dusk. So it's not that the scenes are too dark per se. They're just poorly lit to where there's no contrast. So it's difficult to distinguish one thing from the next. Like the scene with Damon and Rhaenyra fucking, like, I couldn't really see anything there. So I'm just like, all right, whatever. They're having sex. They're trying to make it seem really romantic as if they're not uncle and niece. Whatever. And then Aemond, his scene follows that. And there's a shot where he like kind of like climbs up and he's kind of like looking over a hill. And you could see like a mound of something in the distance. And he goes, fuck. And I'm like, I don't know what the fuck you looking at, bro. Like, it's like all of this looks like a big gray slab of shit. Like, I can't see what anything is because I can't distinguish one thing from the next. So when we move on, we can then presume that it was Vhagar that he was looking at. But that didn't look like a dragon lump in the distance. It just looked like an object set against another object with another object at the fore. And there's no separation to help you distinguish things. And this is indicative of a problem that needs to be addressed, because if you think about it, think about the backlash after the Long Night episode in season 8 episode 3 of Game of Thrones, and the whole darkness that was, I believe, the opening sequence, in particular the sequence of Jon and Daenerys up on their dragons. You couldn't see shit. It was too dark. Now we're here, same situation, can't see shit, not because it's too dark, it's just poorly lit at dusk and there's no contrast or anything. And I'm like, this is now the second time that this has happened, both Miguel Sapochnik directed episodes. And, I can't help but wonder, like, what excuse can you come up with for a second time after the massive backlash the first time doing this again? Like, I can't imagine what the fuck they were thinking. And like, you always have some fucking asshole who goes like, well, if you adjust the fucking settings on your TV and you do this shit, I shouldn't have to change the settings on my TV to watch one fucking show. Like, if every time there's a dark scene or something like that, I'm like, I can't see shit, maybe I should adjust my contrast. But when it only happens with Game of Thrones and it only happens on Miguel Sapochnik episodes, I'm supposed to change my TV settings every time I'm watching Miguel Sapochnik directed Game of Thrones episode? Get the fuck out of here. They need to figure this shit out. Okay? Like, this is not a user error. This is a show error, because now we have a trend. It's happened more than once. Everybody's complaining about it, and it only happens with Game of Thrones shows, and it only happens, more specifically, with Miguel Sapochnik directed episodes. Don't fucking tell me to adjust my fucking TV. Like, they need to figure this shit out. Like, that really irritated me. Like, and it wasn't in the moment that bad. It's the fact, it's the flippant kind of like, yeah, we didn't give a fuck when you complained about it on Game of Thrones, and we don't give a fuck about it now. We're gonna put out some unwatchable shit, and you're gonna fucking eat it, and you're gonna watch it because that's what you do. Like, it feels like a slap in the face, like you just don't fucking care. Like, how did this make it to my screen looking like that? Like, you probably filmed it and it looked great. An editor sat down with it and either said, this is fine, and continued on what they were doing, or they could tell it was fucked up. They let it stay the way it was. However many other people watched it and saw it, like, I can't even think of how many dozens, if not hundreds, of people watched this before it is released. So with ample opportunity to change it, watch this and either don't see it or don't care. And then it gets to my screen, and now the internet is replete with people complaining about how difficult it is to see that scene. And the arrogance, and I'm not saying they're going to do this, but the arrogance of suggesting that we need to fix our TVs when this is clearly a Game of Thrones problem, and clearly I'm not saying Miguel Sapochnik problem, but this is clearly their problem. So, like, that shit needs to, I don't want to rant on this anymore, but, like, that shit is, I'm sick of that shit. They need to figure that shit the fuck out, like, right now. I don't need to see that anymore. But I will say, once Aemond does finally mount Vhagar, the scene of him flying around was really really fucking cool. Like there's the shot where Vhagar nose dives, and it looks like Aemond is like on like the most steep Cedar Point roller coaster ever, and that felt real. So I love how they did that. So after Aemond flies Vhagar around, now we're toward the end of the episode. After Aemond flies Vhagar around, he comes back, and now he's got total big dick energy now. Like Aemond was like a complete fucking like coward. He seemed soft. He seemed meek. Now he walks in like fucking Joffrey Baratheon. Like I don't give a fuck. Like she goes, it was him. And he's like, yeah, motherfucker, it was me. Like he doesn't give a fuck. Like he comes in full like big, like I said, big dick energy. Like you cannot focus. And why would you? He claimed the biggest, baddest, oldest dragon that there is. Why would he be intimidated by anybody? So this turns into a whole fight. The girls attack him. Luke and Jace pop up. They all kind of attack him. He looks like he's about to bash one of their heads in with a rock, which would obviously be the death blow. And Luke cuts him across the face. He ends up losing an eye, and he essentially gets what he had coming to him. So now they go back inside, and now all of the families are fighting. The Velaryons are there because they're all here for the funeral. The Velaryons are there in the room. The Targaryens are there in the room. The Hightowers are there in the room. Kristen Cole, everybody who's there. Otto, everyone's there. And Rhaenyra puts it on Front Street that Aemond called her kids bastards. That was a interesting roll of the dice because you don't really know how that's going to play out. But Viserys decides that he's going to question. Well, he doesn't decide that he's going to question Aemond. Rhaenyra says that Aemond needs to be questioned to figure out where he heard this. He exchanges some glances with his mother, which Viserys catches and exchanges glances between the two of them himself, seemingly putting together that Alicent is probably the person who told him this, and still being Viserys, willfully choosing to be ignorant and ignore it. And he says that he, being Aemond, says that Aegon told him. So now Viserys presses Aegon, and Aegon says what should have been said a very long time ago, but he could only say it because he's Viserys' son. No one else would. He goes, no shit, Dad. Like, fucking look at him. We all know it's not it. Like, we all know this. Everybody knows but you. And rather than address it, Viserys just blows up and says, y'all gotta stop fighting. I'm sick of this shit. And he decides that he's gonna leave without addressing the whole controversy regarding the parentage of Rhaenyra's kids at all. So Alicent decides that's not enough, and she demands an eye for an eye in the very literal sense. She wants Luke's eye. And I like this part because it continues. I've been making this comparison this whole time. Well, not this one, but a similar one. But this reminds me of Cersei when she demanded, after, I think it was Nymeria attacked Joffrey. No, it was Lady, of course. It was Lady. Attacked Joffrey on behalf, not I don't want to say on behalf of Arya, because she didn't sick the direwolf on him, but to protect her. And Cersei demanded that, no, I think it was was it? I can't remember what she demanded, but whatever it was, it resulted in Ned having to kill Lady himself. And so that demand of an eye for an eye in a very evil situation, and in a situation where what you're demanding isn't really even exchange for what happened, very much reminds me of Cersei. And like I said, this comparison here, I've been comparing Rhaenyra to Arya all season. So I think that's just interesting how you can tie those two things in. I was comparing Alicent to Sansa at the beginning, but now she's very much giving Cersei vibes. And then Rhaenyra sets it off, and I believe unintentionally, by once Viserys is like, yo, we ain't doing this eye shit. Like, this is not happening. And Alicent calls on Kristen to do it, and he's like, look, I'm just here to protect you. I'm not here to be taking out no kid's eyes. And Viserys is like, we're done here. Rhaenyra goes, thank you, Father. And as soon as she said it, I'm like, this is gonna be it. And this is why I think after this moment, this is what everything that preceded this kind of set up. Because thank you, Father, was the straw that broke the camel's back, because it was again a reminder that Viserys chooses or sides with Rhaenyra over Alicent. And Alicent's beef this whole time has been like, she had that conversation with Rhaenyra in, I want to say episode 1 or 2, where she decides after this conversation that she's going to do her duty. She helps clean Viserys his wounds or whatever is that's happening with him. Speaking of which, I expected him to be a torso this week, but more on that later. So she started cleaning his wounds. She was having sex with him when she clearly didn't want to, and she's been fulfilling her duty. Meanwhile, Rhaenyra's been running around fucking the fucking commander of the watch, having 3 bastards right under his nose, doing whatever she wants with her privilege. And that thank you, father, was a reminder, like, despite me being dutiful and her not giving a fuck, he continues to side with her. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And she takes Viserys' dagger and goes after, I'm assuming she meant to go after Luke. Rhaenyra steps in, and I love how when they're kind of like grappling for this knife, Kristen Cole starts to come in, and Damon steps in. Damon's been leaning against the door outside of this room the whole time, seemingly enjoying all of this chaos and all of this infighting. But as soon as Kristen Cole starts to make a move, Damon steps in like, like, this is where you stop, buddy. Like, and that's interesting because, we know about Kristen's current relationship with Alicent, and his previous relationship with Rhaenyra. But also remember, in episode 1, Kristen Cole beat Damon like twice at that tourney. Like, I think he beat him on the joust, and I think he beat him on something else too. Like, so we know that Kristen Cole is someone who can get the upper hand on Damon. But that's where Damon steps in, and I thought that was very interesting there as well. And then I love when Alicent makes her good point about, I've been dutiful and you've just been doing whatever the fuck. And then she says something, Rhaenyra responds with something to the effect of like, must have been great to hide behind your privilege, but now everyone sees you as you are. And I love that everyone sees you as you are while she's like holding this knife to Rhaenyra. Like, you're holding a knife to the future queen, to the heir. Like, what? So she ends up cutting Rhaenyra across the forearm, and we later then get a great line from Aemond. I keep wanting to call him Aegon, but it's because I figured Aemond was going to be like kind of irrelevant, and Aegon was going to be the big deal, but Aemond stepped into the big deal realm real big right here, and he said something like, "Don't mourn me, I may have lost an eye, but I gained a dragon." And that is that's a cold line. And Otto even says later, like, he got back 10 times what he paid. So we end up closing that scene with a visual representation of the Dance of Dragons, right? Team Black versus Team Green. There's a literal, like, kind of almost like a face-off shot of Damon, Rhaenyra, and the Velaryons on one side, and the Hightowers and Viserys on another. So, last thing, as far as what happens in the episode, we close the episode with an interesting kind of like juxtaposition of 2 different situations, like some cross-cutting here. So we see Larys Strong offering to take an eye on behalf of Alicent. Like, hey, you said you wanted somebody's eye, I got you. And she says no to that, but says like, I admire and appreciate how useful you've been, and I might need someone with your scumminess and discretion later. And he's like, yeah, Larys is such a fucking scumbag, man. But they cross-cut with Alicent and Larys plotting, with Rhaenyra and Damon plotting. And, they want to get married. Rhaenyra says that, we can't get married. No, Damon says we can't get married as long as Laenor is still alive. She's like, I know. And then we see Damon pay Carl with a Q. I can't stand Carl with a Q. Pay Carl with a Q for what seems to be to kill Laenor. And this was my big issue with this episode. I'm like, I don't buy this. Like, I don't buy that he would even do that. So, like, when they're having this fight, I'm not piecing shit together at all. Damon's like, I want you to kill somebody, but with witnesses. Not without witnesses, with witnesses. That should have been my clue that this was a setup, but I did not have that clue at the time. So when this whole thing is playing out, I'm like, I don't really buy this. Like, I don't buy that Carl would go after Laenor. I don't buy that Laenor would just pull out his sword and not go like, hey, what the fuck's going on here? Like, I just don't buy any of this. So when they reveal that Laenor has shaved his head and is escaping and that he faked his death, and then I go back, I'm like, oh, so that person that Damon grabbed in the hallway is the body that they burned up. to make people think, and the witnesses was so that, you know, they could tell Corlys and Rhaenys, like, hey, yo, these two were fighting. This must be what happened here. And here's now Laenor, and I guess Carl is gone. And, you know, like, they have essentially an alibi and a witness. So, like, that was really well done, because I was done after that. I was like, well, shit, they really fooled me. And now I'm sitting in a place where my one criticism of this episode is no longer a criticism. So it's like, yeah, great fucking job, guys. So, like I said, great episode, but I want to wrap up with a couple of thoughts. This is already pretty much my longest video ever, but there are a few things I want to talk about at the end. One, is it me, or did Viserys look better this week than last week? Like I said, I expected him to be coming in as a torso after we see him with missing an arm last week. I'm like, what's going to be wrong with Viserys this week? And he actually looked better to me. I don't know why that is. I liked when Laenor told Rhaenyra I should have been there, and she was like, those should be our house words. I thought that was really funny. I want to talk about Alicent briefly. You know, I've never really, I think this is, I don't know if this is going to end up being a flaw of the show or not, but Alicent and her actions are predicated on the idea that Rhaenyra is willing to put her kids to the knife in order to solidify her own claim. And the show has not sold me on that. Like, Rhaenyra and Alicent were friends when this idea was even posed to her by her father. And I'm like, why would she even believe that? Like, they're mad cool. And in the book, they're not friends. So that works a little bit easier when they're not friends. But like, now on the show, they were friends. So it's like, it feels like you forced this friendly connection that wasn't in the source material. And now that friendly connection causes me to not buy in to the idea that Rhaenyra would kill Alicent's kids. But now it feels like Alicent has kind of made that a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like, to me, that was not there for her to believe that. It makes sense logically, but there was no evidence on the screen or evidence within this world that Rhaenyra would do something like that. But now we're at a point where one of Rhaenyra's kids is taking out one of her kids' eyes. She has requested an eye. She tried to go after her. She cut her. Like, now this has become violent. Now Rhaenyra probably is willing to kill her kids in order to help, not even necessarily submit her own claim, but even just to protect her own kids. And now Alicent is willing to recruit Larys to do some shit for her. Like, now we have every reason to believe that Rhaenyra would harm her kids. And that's interesting because, like I said, we had no reason to believe that before, but we do now. And that's all on Alicent. Like, that wasn't there before to me as a potential outcome. That wasn't on the screen. But because of Alicent buying into it when Otto said it, weaving his goddamn dragon thread, since she believed it when he said it, she has now taken actions that have kind of made that a potential possibility. And I think that's kind of cool that the show has done that. Then lastly, I want to talk about, real quick, how this show is compared to Game of Thrones. And I don't think it's fair. You know, people say this show is moving slow. It hasn't gone to a whole bunch of different locations like Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones did this, Game of Thrones did that. And it's weird how people are comparing the first 6 episodes of this show to when Game of Thrones was at its peak. Don't compare the first 6 episodes of this to season 4 of Game of Thrones. Think about the first 6 episodes of Game of Thrones, because I feel like people who are making this criticism have completely forgotten the nature of the first 6 episodes of Game of Thrones. And we'll say 7 now. But this was not, like, we were not doing, like, Battle of the Bastards in season 1 of Game of Thrones. Like, the big event from Game of Thrones was Ned's death, which happens at the end of episode 9. And it's just this one thing. It's impactful, but it's that there's no huge battles in season 1. There's no like huge budgetary things that it's like, wow, look at all the money they have. It was a very simple, grounded show in season 1, very much like this one. But for some reason, people are like, Game of Thrones did this. Game of Thrones did that in season 5. Like, don't compare the 6th episode of a show to the 5th season of another. And I think that's something people got to stop doing when they compare these two shows. If you want to compare the two shows, compare where we're at. 7 episodes into the first season here, compare that to the first 7 episodes of Game of Thrones, and I bet you're not going to find too many differences, and you're definitely going to see some more budget stuff. And then the time jumps. People have been complaining about the time jump. Are they going to jump time again? Like, I don't care about the time jumps. It feels like people are just saying that to complain about it because they can. Because, like, if you think about even myself, right? I said it would have been interesting to see how Rhaenyra developed a romantic relationship with Harwin during the time jumps. And so from my perspective in that moment, I'm like, man, that time jump, like, there's so many things I would have liked to have seen what happened in those 10 years, including that thing. But now, here we are at the end of the following episode, and it doesn't even fucking matter. Who cares how Rhaenyra ended up having a relationship with Harwin Strong? He's dead, and now she's married to Damon. Like, it's completely irrelevant. So, like, I feel like we're complaining, not we, but people are complaining about the time jumps just because it feels like they should be complaining about something. Like, this feels like something I could levy as a criticism, but I would challenge you, why? What are the time jumps causing you to miss that you need? There are things that I would like, but there's nothing that I've needed in a time jump that I'm sitting here like, man, if they had just spent some time there, this scene would make more sense. Everything that I've seen and everything that's happened, everything that's important has been justified on the screen. I don't need the time jump information. So, like, I would challenge people complaining about the time jumps to specify what they would have gained, how would it enhance their experience of what they've seen had we not had a time jump, or had we spent more time in some of these time periods that we've jumped over. It reminds me of how people will go, I didn't like that show. The writing wasn't good. What do you mean the writing wasn't good? What about the writing was dissatisfactory to you? And no one can fucking answer that. Like, at least a lot of people can't, because it just feels like I've seen a lot of other people say that the writing is bad on something as a reason to not like it. So that's what I'm going to say now. The writing wasn't good. What do you mean about that? Is so vague and open-ended. What do you mean the writing wasn't good? What was wrong with the writing specifically that could have been different that you would have liked? And they can't answer that fucking question because they don't know what they're talking about when they say that. And, like, I'm not saying that people who are complaining about the time jumps don't know what they're talking about. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is, think about what you perceive as having lost during these time jumps, and if it's something that you actually think that you needed, that could have made something that you saw make more sense. Because I don't have any complaints about anything that I've seen so far. So as far as, like, whether or not it makes sense, where I'm like, oh man, if we had skipped over some time, this will make more sense. I don't see that. So if you're somebody who's upset about the time jumps, one, let me know why. Let me know what you think you would have gained from not having these time jumps. And two, prepare yourself for another fucking time jump next week if you haven't watched the preview for next week's episode. So this is my longest video ever, but I think it was needed. There was a lot to cover here. This was a great episode. Again, they work very well with not implied things, but kind of just things that sit with you, where it's like you see these events happen, these things are properly built up to, and then now we get to spend the next week worrying about the fallout. What's the next move? How do you respond to that? And I think that's what the best shows do, is they stick with you when you're not watching them. And I think this is one of those episodes that sticks with you, and we're going to be thinking about this and the fallout from this all the way up until next week for episode 8, and we're going to be excited for it. I know I'm going to be excited, and I'll see you guys next week for episode 8. Peace.